be like demonstrating everywhere, every time in front of parliament or in front of the palace. So it would have been really, really interesting to see if any of the European or Norwegian students could do that for us.
So one of the, one of the realities that we have to face is that there's not much public support for free higher education for the rest of the world. And so it's a very, very tough sell. If you go out on the street and you said you think it's important that Norwegian universities are free for Norwegian students, most people will say yes. And then if you follow up by saying, and do you think Norwegian universities should be free for students from, Nepal, there would be a very different distribution. So one possibility is to try to think of alternative models. Mm-hmm. So the government, our current government, but also the last government, they will sometimes toss out a slogan of the type, Norway will run out of people before it runs out of money. So one of the biggest problems in Norway, and part of the reason that the unemployment rate is so low, is that there's fewer people than what industry and the public sector need as employees. The very biggest problem in northern Norway in terms of building up the economy there is too few people to work there. So it's kind of strange that on the one hand the government says, if we're going to run out of people, that's our biggest problem. Oh, and this group of highly motivated, well-educated, international young people, not them, right? So one idea that I sometimes try out, I've never worked out the precise details, is to say, instead of saying you can come and study for 2 years and then you have to leave, and now saying you can come and study for 2 years if you can put 500,000 kroner in the bank before you get here, and then you have to leave. An alternative would be to say, no, everybody can study for free here, but if you come from abroad, you have to make a commitment to work in Norway for at least 2 years after you finish your studies, right? And then you'll be making an income, and you'll be paying income taxes that will be part of supporting the public education system. So, you have to fine-tune this, and of course you can't force people to stay if they don't want to stay. But that kind of model where we actually used higher education as a way to attract people to come to Norway, to this place where it seems that we all agree that there's too few people in order to be able to build up the industry that we want to build up. And maybe that's an alternative kind of model where a politician doesn't have to meet criticism from their voters who say there's no reason to, they say all these things like, well, we have to pay when we go abroad, so why shouldn't they pay when they come here? And which is yet another topic we could discuss, but if we could say, no, you know what, we have too few people in this country, one business after the next, all they say is that their biggest problem is recruiting. They can't find enough well-qualified people. So one of the ways we're going to deal with that is by opening the doors to our universities. We're going to say, you can come, you can study here, you can live off a student loan just like everybody else, but then we want you to stay.
I think that's such a smart idea, and that is an idea I personally haven't heard before, but just that idea of kind of, I don't know if you've heard, like the killing two birds with one stone.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That kind of idea is actually implemented in Nepal for the medical students, because studying medicine is really expensive, and it's like a tough competition. So what they can, every time there are more doctors being produced, but at the same time in the remote areas there are no doctors and people are dying because of diarrhea or dysentery, like small, even common flu. So in those cases what they have come across is giving medicine scholarships, and if you get a medicine scholarship to study the bachelor's or the master's in it, you have to go and serve 5 years in remote areas.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a choice. That is a really good motive, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So after that, I think that suggestions also kind of goes over this excuse that I've heard being used a lot, is that, oh, you know, these international students, they come here, study, and then they leave and go back to their own country. They don't pay, as we said, they don't pay the taxes, they don't do this, they don't do that. Absolutely not true. The majority of international students that I know work and pay taxes here. They pay their living expenses here, besides many, many other challenges that they face. And many of the international students that I know want to stay here. They want to work here, they want to live here. I don't want to go back. I didn't come to Norway to go back to Bosnia. I can't do anything with my degree at home because, you know, there's only limited options for me there. I didn't just come here to get a bachelor in international development and try to find a job back in my own country. I wish I could, but a lot of students don't have that possibility because we come from countries where only degrees in medicine, engineering, or law are, you know, the ones that can give you a job, whereas in Norway there's a lot more possibilities. And you know, I hate this excuse being made that we don't contribute to the economy, that we don't want to stay, and we're just here to kind of use up all the benefits and, you know, not give back in any way. So, you know, having this idea and proposal would, as you say, kind of kill two birds with one stone. It's just, you know, it would, also kill off this whole excuse of, you know, that we're just using.
Especially with like the very diverse degrees in Norway.
Yeah.
Those aren't things you can usually find job opportunities for
Exactly.
in many countries, but because they're degrees here, there are usually more options to find.
Absolutely, and that's why I came to Norway as well, because I couldn't find degrees like this anywhere, especially not at home. So, you know, to now feel like you're being kicked out almost because, you know, of everything that's happening, it's very defeating and disappointing. So.
100%. I wanted to go. Oh, sorry.
You wanted to say something?
There's so many things to say, but linked to the migration issue, as we've discussed in the human rights class, there is a global compact on safe, orderly migration that Norway is also a party to from 2018, which encourages sort of safe, orderly, regular migration as opposed to illegal, informal, risky, dangerous migration. And migration for studies is one such case. It is very safe and orderly, and it's very controlled. It's an excellent form of migration and movement, and it could be attached to employment. That would be fine. And the irony of the situation is that what this nationalist government in Norway is saying is that actually it's only sort of some kind of EU status that gives you access. So there's an increased pressure to actually try and get some even informal migration into EU to get a connection to EU. Then from there you can apply, while at the same time reducing access to a good, regular, safe, orderly migration. So I think I have, in the current consultation that the Education Committee and Parliament is having, made that migration point. I've been sort of been in doubt about it, but I think it is also a valid dimension. And you should not have bad conscience for coming or for imposing a cost. It's completely crazy to even, I have said in our program committee meeting that we should pay international students because they are a value for our programs and for Norwegian society.
100%.
And it is, we're talking about 2-3% of students in Norway. It's completely arbitrary and strange that the minister is forcing universities to charge average fees for these last students. It's the average cost of running the education program is not really applicable to the last 2-3% who provide flavor, diversity, competence to our programs. It's such a narrow-minded and completely upside down way of trying to think or not thinking and not appreciating what current international global education is about.
Yeah. I wanted to get a bit into those, you know, prices that the government says are worth, you know, paying tuition fees. Like we had said, you had mentioned, I have to think, we had mentioned things like the housing crisis, that especially is one of the reasons why they had talked about why tuition fees are, you know, a good opportunity. There were a bunch of other aspects that they had talked about that might be why they wanted to push this agenda a bit more. Can we talk about what those negativities are in your mind? And again, why they aren't worth the risk of losing the international body at some of these universities?
Yeah, I remember one sentence in that process actually. I read somewhere that the minister mentioned that it's already the students who are from rich background who are coming to Norway.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I am going to invite him for the dinner, and I actually wrote an email to him. Come to dinner. Come to dinner at my place. He didn't reply though. Obviously busy person. But I was like, how can you say that they are rich people who are coming from those countries to pursue education here? Me, at 24, I decided I have to do my master's in Norway. It was like, I knew I wanted to do something for my society back, something for my family, something for my village. I am the first female from the whole like 10,000 or 20,000 population in 5 or 6 villages. It is more than that. That I'm the first female without being socially married and coming to abroad for pursuing master's education. It was only the choice or only the decision I could make because Norway had a free education during that time. I remembered all those conversations with my family, with my parents, with the universities and the corona pandemic. It was not an easy life, not an easy choice. And someone saying that, oh, rich people come to Norway. I'm like, I talked to so many students after going there. Everybody were like, if we would have been rich, if we would have had enough money to pay the fees in the Norwegian universities, we would have never chosen Norway first place. That was the first thing that most of the international students think. First, because Norway is not an easy country to live in. The language, the issue of, I once mentioned that the language is an issue, but the way the society is here, the way
barrier, plus, as you said, so many other barriers when you come to Norway, the cultural differences, the language differences, and then of course, you know, almost every single international person that I know working here, and you know, and that is their primary income of how they pay for their dorms, how they pay for their lifestyle, everything. So, and not a lot of people see that, or not a lot of people consider that when they say it, because they will think that, oh, this person's rich, they can't afford to live in Norway, and they can't afford to come here, but they don't know how, and they don't know what's behind all of that, because they've not experienced it themselves. They don't know what it takes to come here, and what the application process looks like.
And that was one of the comments I got, and I was allowed to quote in an article by Uba, who said immediately in the first discussion, well, if that applied to me, I would have to work even more. I would be asleep when I'm in class. And this is a serious issue. I mean, the harder the financial pressure, the more difficult the academic participation and performance will become. I mean, on the economic side, unfortunately, the minister and the press have been using exaggerated figures on the sort of savings potential. You know, from the minister has used the figure of 3.5 to 5 billion kroner a year, which are costs that apply to all international students, all exchange. They have used the figures for the pressure on student housing for all international students, while we're talking about a relatively small group of students. And I think that has been very hard to sort of dispel. And I think a good deal of the sort of the Norwegian population, if they've noticed at all, and also politicians, are misguided because of that. And that's why the sort of the argument, oh, now it's a cost of living crisis, inflation, and so on, which is the argument Borten, the minister, has also used, although that was not the case when he also proposed the same thing in 2017, and when he also worked with the newspaper Aftenposten to say exactly the things that he were arguing, and they did exactly the same tactics again, exactly coordinated interview with the minister, and Aftenposten writes an editorial with these high costs, pressure on student housing. It's time to introduce tuition fees for international students. A completely sort of deliberately misguided argument and information to the public.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the free education is definitely a competitive advantage for Norway in terms of attracting people based on merit and not money. And obviously the possibility to have kind of that two-step migration where you first come for your degree and then possibilities also incentivized for you to have like a period to look for jobs after. Also the option, for going back. So I think in terms of, the costs, obviously you have like the various housing aspects and, that we have to pay tuition fees if we go abroad. But also it's more of in terms of what you lose as well. Definitely there has been a lot of focus on like quality, which is, in higher education, which is kind of like, they mention quality without really specifying what it is.
Yeah.
And like I saw a quote, for example, from one of the deputy secretaries and or deputy ministers in the education department that was saying like, Norwegian universities have built up so much quality that the fact that now education isn't free anymore shouldn't discount for people applying to it. But then as well, you don't really think about how much of that quality comes from the classroom environment, from the students, from the different perspectives. So I think it's definitely short-sighted and definitely implementing it in such a short time frame. When we like to compare ourselves to like, oh, we want to implement this, and this is what Sweden and Denmark did, and to some extent also Finland, who all introduced tuition fees, over the last 15 or so years. But the fact is, for those countries, they had kind of a trial period where they had kind of like, okay, let's see how this works, and they had more of possibilities to have kind of the stipend, different programs and scholarship programs, and also having some way for students to come and study, but also work next to their studies, and then be also eligible to some stipends because of that. So I think it's definitely short-sighted by the Norwegian government in doing it, in such a short time frame as well.
Yes. Well, I think we've covered a lot of diverse areas of the tuition fees. I wanted to open just up to you guys if you had any questions, any concerns that maybe you personally had about tuition fees.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one question. It's to the university to just see how they're faring with this whole sudden move, because I know it's been a lot to change the system. If you can just give us a brief of how it has been backstage with the universities, how they've been in preparing for the new students.
I'm sorry, what was the last part? How they've been?
How you've been preparing for the students coming this year.
The ones who want to come in the fall?
Yes.
So this, in a certain way, this relates to the very first question. And what I said then is that when the proposal came, I thought, we will succeed at fighting this back. And it took a while before I realized that we wouldn't. So already at the instruction of the government, last spring, I guess, when we started advertising the possibility to apply to study here with the usual December 1st deadline, already then we said there probably is going to be tuition fees. But it was a bizarre situation that in December and January and February, when we're usually working very hard to select applicants and inform them, and we still didn't know what the fees were. And we have such a provincial minister that we thought it would be perfectly acceptable to send a letter to people to say, congratulations, you're admitted to this program. It's going to cost you something. We don't know how much. And at a conference for all of the leaders of universities in January, he glibly said from the stage, if you don't want to set the fee yourself, I'll be happy to set it for you. So I called him a couple days later, and I said, great, why don't you set it? Because we can't figure out how to do this. It doesn't make any sense to us. And so you go ahead and set it, and we'll use that. Now, then that offer was no longer on the table. So great, because it's really hard. And, you know, as Paul's pointed out, they make up this thing about the actual costs as though that's a factual issue and not a matter of analysis where there are multiple possible analyses. So it's a long-winded answer to your question. You know, we have tried to inform students, and then in February or so we sent out something and said, okay, now we think it's going to cost whatever it is, 80,000 kroner. Do you still want to maintain your application? A surprisingly high number did, but I think they were hedging their bets there a bit. So so it's just happened much too quickly. It has really denied us the opportunity to prepare, you know, to get scholarships in place and things like that. And so it certainly, I'm sure from the outside, it appears somewhat chaotic. And I understand that it has been chaotic. But so it's, you know, it's not our finest moment in terms of preparing people for what's to come. But that's because we don't know what's to come. And I think that, and I do think it's important to keep in mind that that when it comes to cost, Norway is never going to successfully compete on cost. Cost is never going to be the competitive advantage of this country. Sometimes for good reasons, right? You know, there's the window of incomes in Norway is small, and there's relatively little poverty, and all of that's wonderful. But that means that the real cost of things are high. So Norway's never going to compete on cost, and yet somebody thinks that that's the way to go in terms of pricing. So.
Yeah, I mean, also sort of from the inside, as a program leader, then involved, and actually for the first time in the selection of students, feeling it's been a really, really bad process. You know, a lot of extra work and meetings and postponements and uncertainty, unfair treatment of applicants. So really Norway and the universities owe a big apology to all applicants because of this, you know, inviting applications without being clear, sending letters without being clear on how much you're going to pay. And so I am personally sort of ashamed and find it difficult to be involved in that kind of process. And I'm not sure I'm willing to do it once more. And then, yeah, I feel it just changes everything. It will also change the situation in the classroom in August, you know. I mean, even if there are students there, you know, mix of students, some are there for free, others have to pay. For my program, it's 125,000 kroner per year, a master program. And then I know there'll be empty chairs then. We know that students will not be able, we have experienced the same as Kurt says, many people actually, or many student applicants have maintained their applications. But I think it's hoping that this will not come to pass, just as we are hoping that it will not come to pass. And so it's a very unfortunate process. And, you know, government's expectation is that of the 8,000 to 9,000 group student affected, that, you know, 70% will go away, disappear, 30% will come and pay. That's less than 1% of students in Norway. And I am quite sure that the cost of just running this system, the bank accounts, the information, the calculations that we're supposed to do every year to calculate what the specific cost of a specific program is. Norway has 4 different programs that it needs to calculate the cost of. And how do you do it? The costs are going to exceed the payments of those 1%, that small group of students, in addition to be unfair.
I'm going to have to
Yes,
go on the same way. So thanks for the opportunity to
Thank
be
you
here.
so much
It's
for
great.
coming.
And
Do you
all
wanna
the people
meet
who are
with-
here are really here.
Yes.
And I just wish your your younger brothers and sisters could come next year.
Yeah, we're
Yes.
gonna take, sorry, one quick picture and then we'll.
One quick picture.
Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Coming to the
Okay, one quick picture and then I really. That's it. One train.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. We can take a couple more questions if anybody has anything else they want to ask while the panelists are here. Anything? Yeah?
When this was proposed, the government was actually saying that there has to be a significant economical advantage for the universities too, that they'll be able to make more money. So in terms of planning, or at least in terms of seeing what you guys can see, is there an actual economical advantage, or it was just political talk?
Well, I mean, one argument is and that is, you know, the proposal has just gone to Parliament, the actual legal proposal, Stortingsproposition number 68, and it uses the term that resources will be released for Norwegian and EU and Swiss students, resources in the meaning of, you know, 6, 7, 8,000 students will stay away, and thus sort of the there'll be more teaching capacity, more room, whatever. That kind of that kind of benefit is sort of the idea in the government's mind. And I mean, they have sort of said that this is a kind of sort of incentivizing universities. We will not reduce the support for the university by quite as much as the loss of income for those students. So it's possible in some calculus somewhere there is some kind of, I don't know,
But do you
economic.
think it's for, at least for NMBU, is it worth it?
No, of course not. It's a huge disadvantage academically, and will also be economically, I'm quite sure.
Magnus, did you have something
Yeah,
to add?
I think basically, you know, a lot on the political level when they talk about internationalization, there's a lot of focus on like having research cooperations and exchange programs, and that at least on a political level is like hailed as like, oh, now we're going to get our university is going to be so nice, but then student migration in terms of full-time degrees is kind of like mentioned briefly at the end if you look through kind of the policy documents. And you know, I think in terms of, you know, economic benefits, like obviously you have the political talking points of, you know, student housing, opening up some more spots for Norwegian students, which kind of like deflects from the fact that, you know, governments for several years have promised, you know, we're going to build more student housing, but they, you know, they have they're nowhere close to actually meeting the amount of housing needed. And also, I think in terms of yeah, you know, the fact that the university has to have much more costs associated to administration definitely outweighs some of the benefits that have been presented on a political level. You know, I think the political thinking is kind of short-sighted, thinking that, you know, the Norwegian education system is so nice and the quality is so good that we're gonna attract those students anyway, but, you know, it's definitely not gonna be in quite a few years. And, you know, if you end up getting more EU students, you know, you just kind of have them come for free instead of, you know, so it's, it would really be interesting to see like how much the actual benefit like benefits Norwegian students, but obviously and I don't think that will outweigh the loss of like the educational quality in terms of classroom, yeah, the classroom quality, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna take one last question if anybody has one.
Isa had her hands up.
It's more like a comment or like
Sure.
because I think also like in Norwegian society there has to be created more awareness about the value of education, because we kind of take it for granted, and I myself come from an EU background, and this whole debate also opened my eyes how important education is, and what I take for granted now being here as an EU citizen, and also how easy I had it compared to my fellow students to come here. No money to to borrow or to like to have the amount, because I would just have to sign one sentence, oh, I have sufficient funds. No investigation, nothing. And I heard from friends that like the family had to sell the car to have this money in advance. And so I think, sensibilizing more students what this value is here.
Definitely. All right, so thank you all for coming.
I could talk about the value.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that is like one of SAI's main things in terms of promoting that higher education should be a right and not like a product. And definitely what you mentioned in terms of what I don't think we've mentioned sufficiently is maybe that a lot of the countries affected by this tuition fee comes from countries where the students have to pay also for going to school. So obviously, in terms of having it free here in Norway, it's really an act of solidarity in allowing people to come and pursue their education and kind of achieve that which they otherwise might not have been able to do. And it definitely helps kind of alleviate some of the inequalities that we see internationally, not only because of tuition fees, but also here in Norway, we have the cornerstones of free education, but also Lånekassen, the loan and grant scheme, which we see also in many countries. They do not have that. They might have some form of student loans, but then the terms are much worse, and kind of makes them slaves to debt over a long time. So I think it's important to kind of have that, to think about that aspect, that students are kind of robbed of the possibility of at least pursuing a 5-year education. They might have afforded a bachelor's degree, but then going further, they don't have the means to pay for that in their home country.
Yeah, that's a big point. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, the point I would like to say is linked to your point when the minister says, there are already barriers to education, not everyone can afford it. So we can just add another barrier. That is a ridiculous argument. You should think then we must reduce those barriers. As you say, a good access to free education is important, and access is an issue. Even in Nordic countries, research shows that universities are equalizers. They're equalizers, meaning in the sense that once you enter, if you get in, then the performance is not dependent on your class background. It's mixed across from working class, lower class, or elite. But access to getting into university is still biased and selective. Also, even in Nordic countries with relatively lower wealth inequality, with free tuition. So we must keep the access as open as absolutely possible. And I'm not always a big fan of the Sustainable Development Goals, but if you go and read Sustainable Development Goal 4, Target 4.3, it says the world promises universal access for all men and women to affordable higher education by 2030. This is some of the kind of dreams we have in Sustainable Development Goals and human rights, but we shouldn't at least move in the wrong direction, and a rich country like Norway should not, make a choice in the wrong direction in terms of that access and moving towards that ideal.
Especially in their large support for the UN's sustainable goals in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, you can just go and look on government websites, which I did just a few days ago with the praise for these goals.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I just It's also like there's this argument being made that when Norwegian students go abroad, they also have to pay.
Yes,
Then, for
that
example,
was the point.
If
Yeah.
you look at the position of Norway in the Human Development Index, being first place, like what it kind of feels arbitrary to even have this debate. And we have to be a role model for countries that are developing in their education system, kind of.
I mean, there is a concern right now with Norwegian students studying abroad in terms of the exchange rate. So that is definitely something that is affecting them because they get if they get their funds from Lånekassen, they get it in like a lump sum. And then, you know, a couple of months later, it might have fluctuated enough to really affect their living situation. But I mean, you know, normally it's really a great, you know, we have a great way of kind of accessing education abroad because of that. And I think, you know, in terms of the tuition fees that international students face in their home countries, you know, it's completely different because kind of the level of that, you know, if you compare exactly kind of the living standards and kind of like how much of that, you know, percentage would be out of their annual incomes, I think it's, you know, in favor of Norwegian students. And, you know, it really is a testament to the sacrifices that a lot of people do to get an education. And kind of the economical sacrifices.
Yeah. Uba, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I want to add that the debate of Norwegian students paying tuition fees when they go to other countries to study, but then we have to also consider that even the students who are from those countries pay tuition fees in their countries. So.
They're on equal terms.
If it were a situation whereby the locals also don't pay tuition fees, then and then you charge Norwegian students tuition fees, that would have been like an argument. But those who come from there pay tuition fees.
So it's the discrimination.
Yeah, like it's so much that you, even when you graduate, you pay to get your certificate.
Yeah.
After you pay tuition fee, you have to pay, like you have to pay to get your certificate. To get your transcript, you have to pay to get your transcript, and it takes a lot of time. And another thing that has to be considered is like the quality of education and the length, like how the duration of education. Like back home, I've seen like one of my friends, classmates in my bachelor's, who is now doing her master's in the UK, had to quit because she has been doing masters for over 2 years and she has not graduated.
Yeah.
So she had to quit that master's and start a new one at the UK. And now she's like a 12 or 14 months master's and she's almost getting done. Whereby back home she has not even finished like half of the program in 2 years because of different political stuff going on. And secondly, the issue of Paul made mention of discussion we had like when this whole tuition fee started. Another thing that has to be the government have to bear in mind is that for international students, it's not just tuition fees. We've not even talked about the living expenses they have to transfer to them. Okay, for instance, as an international student, you get admission, and then you have to send. As of last year, it was around 129,000 krona plus. As of this year, it's 137,000 krona. This is apart from the tuition fee, if you are paying tuition fee. And then apart from that, you have to apply for the visa, and it's almost 6,000 kronas, about 5,900 kronas. And then the government, knowing that your studies is meant to last for at least 2 years or 3 years, gives you 1 year visa. And after 1 year, you go back and pay another money to apply for a renewal. These are some of the situations that I have not even like the international students like overlook and then come here. And then it's not like okay, for the argument about housing or something like international students pay their rents like even before you pay your rent upfront. One one of us was telling me like they have already gotten the invoice for the payment of rent for next month.
Yeah.
You are still in it, like you already have to pay for the rent for me. So it will be like a double load on international students, and I'm predicting that even people who will end up coming here, I doubt the quality of education they will get, because most people will end up not going to classes. But just like I said, I told Paul that most international students who will end up, if people will end up coming here, they won't be coming to classes.
Yeah.
Because you have because the next year, in your second year, you have to pay your tuition fee. You also have to provide to the immigration agency that you have your living expenses. So you are working on like about 300, at least 250 to 300,000 krona budgets every year. That's like average of 500 to 600,000 krona in a 2 years master's program. So how do international students get that kind of money? So these are kind of things that I have to consider.
And then you in the green? Yes.
Yeah, I just, to go on with this.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, I'm from the US, which I feel like, maybe this is US centric, but I feel like US is like classic, like way too much tuition, right? Like the model of like privatization, commercialism of education. A lot of our public universities are going towards tuition free and reducing the costs. And honestly, a lot of them are cheaper than Norway without scholarships or anything. I have beef about Norwegians paying to go abroad because I did my exchange here. I had to pay my school, like my tuition fees to my US university while I was on exchange, whereas the Norwegians that did it, didn't. Right, so I was paying my US fees to go to school in Norway. And this was like in 2017, like way before any of this. Right, so I think it's super unfair. And then I also, with providing all that money ahead of time, right, so now we have to add more. And for a master's degree, a lot of the time in the US, you get funding, you get grants, you get paid, right? So the only reason I came to Norway was because it was free, right? If I had to pay, I wouldn't go because why would I? I get paid in the US, right? And that's the US. So I think it's a massive step in the wrong direction. And I think it's going to show quickly.
Well, of course, yeah.
All right, so.
And we definitely want students from the whole world. I mean, Latin America, North America, Oceania. Also the countries in Europe that are always sort of disregarded, which happen to be the poorer countries of Southeast Europe, are also, negatively affected by this. We also want those students.
Yeah, so what a great discussion. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you all for Feel free to grab some more snacks on your way out.
Snacks and business.
So we are done with the event now, and I hope you heard a thing or two. You could just leave your questions, send me a message, and I'll do well to respond. And I'll see you in the next video.